And as Jenny pointed out, this is our second presentation on our journey forward, and specifically a journey moving towards the development of a strategic plan. Before I start off, I would like to thank all of you for joining and wish all of you a very, very happy Mother's Day. I cannot think of a better start having our service and then continuing to stay engaged with our presentation for our strategic plan planning. So thank you all very much. I hope you have a marvelous day. So what I'm going to sort of pick up here is start with a little bit of a recap of what we did the past meeting, and that was 2 weeks ago. And it is available on YouTube if you didn't see it or you want to just rewatch it. But as we move towards our strategic plan, one of the things that you're hearing a lot, and you will continue to hear a little bit, is the why, the what, and the how. And our values are going to ultimately underlie the why of what we do. Some of the what we're doing is a basis of some of the things you're going to be hearing about today, and then ultimately the plan itself will express how we will proceed. So at our presentation on April 25th, we started by sharing what we've established as St. Simon's core values, and I've just relisted them here. They are grouped in these 4 categories: the belovedness, the faith-filled, the serving, and the partnership. And as you read through those or are reminded of those, these have been based upon, this wasn't just a recent survey, these have been based upon an extended period of time using the most recent CAT surveys, the rector search meetings, as well as Jenny's get to know you sessions. So these are things that we have kind of found have been remaining very, very consistent about what people feel about St. Simon's, like about St. Simon's, and feel we are all about, and those core values. We also, at that presentation, explored some of the current church and societal changes that are creating both challenges, but also opportunities for our parish. And we explored some of the issues of declining church membership nationally, and collectively with other churches, but also within the Episcopal Church itself. We talked a little bit about the demographic shifts that are taking place at the national level, but also at our community level, and how maybe the demographics of our congregation don't mirror those changes, and we tend to be a little bit older, we tend to be a little bit more wealthy, and we tend to be less diverse. We talked about some of the broad impacts of the pandemic that they have impacted not just our society at large, but also our church itself. And also the social and economic justice movements that have highlighted some of the inequity of the past year, but certainly are not new, but more attention was brought and they became a little bit more visible to the broader society. And that all of this kind of led us towards this idea that maybe it's time to reimagine church and what church really is in this time of this past year of separation, for example, but also opportunities to examine ministry and how we are meeting the needs of our society at large. So ultimately, we concluded that although our core values have remained consistent, that something seems different this time. And one of the things that caught our attention was the phrase that bells are ringing that cannot be unrung. But we also recognize that St. Simon's isn't a parish that seems to want to go back to the way it was. We want to be ready for the church that is to come. And in order to do that, we want to look at ourselves, of course, but we also feel the need to look at how we relate to our broader community. So today, with that as a bit of a backdrop, in light of those findings, we would like to take a step and move towards providing more information about how we're working towards the development of a 5-year strategic plan for St. Simon's. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Lynn.
So in typical Episcopalian fashion, your rector and your vestry are engaged in a process to discern the strategic direction forward. And hopefully we can chart something that makes sense to all in the parish. As we learned not only at our last meeting, but has been recapped by Mike, the world is evolving, changing, and presenting new challenges. Since we are undergoing changes as a parish, having had Jenny join us as our rector, and the things that have occurred over the last year with the pandemic, we know that the world is not only evolving, but it's almost evolving at an accelerating rate. So we know we have challenges to meet, but we also know there are opportunities. Unfortunately, this process will take time. And at first, it will be less apparent. It may be murky in terms of the process that we're going through. Next slide, please. So as has been said, and you'll hear it many times, not only before, but also in this presentation, we are going to be guided by those core values that Mike summarized. These are the things for organizations that survive and thrive. These are the things that never change. And when all is said and done, we still will be us, but we will be better positioned to parry threats and seize opportunities. As I'm sure you all are aware, we have already begun to make necessary changes. The things we've done to use virtual and in-person meetings to keep us connected, I think, is apparent to everyone. Undoubtedly, we're going to need to make additional changes going forward because of the changes in society as well as the changes in our own parish. Next slide, please. Now, in a time that is static, where there's not a lot of change, most of our problems present themselves as technical in nature. These are easy things to identify. The solutions are often quick and easy, and usually can be sorted out without changing a great deal about the situation. And everyone is generally receptive to the solutions that emerge, and they can be quickly implemented. However, when you get into a time of rapid change, where things are evolving, you need to make adaptive adjustments. And these are difficult to identify when you see a situation evolving. And sometimes they even require changes in belief, in roles, relationships, and approaches. Everyone needs to be engaged in trying to solve the problem, and changes will be required in numerous places. Unfortunately, this means that people often resist these, even acknowledging that adaptive challenges are presenting themselves. And the solutions require experimentation, new discoveries, and they often take a long time. So where we found ourselves before the pandemic was in a situation where we were pretty much on the left-hand side of this continuum, where our problems were largely technical in nature and the solutions were relatively easy to see and implement. Unfortunately, as things have evolved, we've now moved into a pandemic world and a post-pandemic world where the mix between technical problems and adaptive challenges has changed. And we now need to make probably more adaptive changes than just technical ones. And we're trying to factor this all into our 5-year strategic plan. So at this point, I'm going to pass it to Louise.
Before we proceed, just a little bit of clarification about values. There is a difference between values or core values and goals. As has already been mentioned, you know our core values by now are belovedness, we're a faith-filled parish, we're a serving parish, and there's a great partnership between the clergy and parishioners. But core values are not our goals or strategies. Values are why we do what we do. They represent who we are. You've seen this before. Goals are what we will do. And one way to think about goals is that goals are SMART. They're specific, measurable, attainable, results-based, and have a specific time frame. Strategies are how we will do what we do. And we're going to talk about those now. So I'm turning this over to Carol.
Thank you, Louise. The vestry, as you heard, learned and read and discussed all the things that we had heard from the parish. And while we knew there were many things we can do, we also know that we can't do everything. So we divided the strategic areas into 3 different categories: worship and formation, proclaiming, service, and justice. And let's take a minute to look at some of these. Worship and formation is first. We're a church after all. This is what we do. We have a place here where we can build on the strengths we already have, and we can also concentrate on things where we want to improve. We heard your concerns about getting more children and young families into the church, and also about the lack of diversity in our congregation. We also want to work on coming up with alternatives to the current divisions and mistrusts that are rampant in our society today. You will notice both in this section and in the next section, social media and technology are both listed. This isn't a mistake. It's just that we happen to believe that these 2 areas will be very important in the church going forward. The next slide is proclaiming, which is proclaiming what? We are proclaiming us here and now. This is more than just an invitation to invite a friend to church. This is important. We've been doing this for years and we should continue doing it. This is more about making St. Simon's better known and more visible in the Arlington Heights and the surrounding community. Our community is bigger than just Arlington Heights, and we need to go where the people are. This work could possibly involve developing partnerships with other churches or community groups to work on issues that we've uncovered. We could also partner with other churches to bring in events that would benefit St. Simon's, maybe some things we couldn't do on our own. And we agree that social media will play an important role in making St. Simon's more visible into the community. The next, service and justice. In addition to caring for people who come to St. Simon's, we want to care for the people in the general community. This is something that we've been doing so far with our pads, dinners, and summer suppers. The fact that these 2 programs have been so well received by the community, by St. Simon's, speaks well of us, and we want to continue doing them. Environmental stewardship is another area that's very important to our church family. To summarize this section, we are building on the strengths that St. Simon's already has, and we'll go forward from there. You'll also notice that these areas are called preliminary, and they may be modified as we learn more in this process. We are curious about what God is calling us to do in this place and this time. And I will now turn it over to Jenny.
Thank you. I have a new mic. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, we've done a whole lot of internal listening, right? Over these years, as you have done the work around preparing for your new rector, since I've arrived, we've done a whole lot of internal listening. And now it's time for us to turn our ears outward and do some very intentional listening in our community. And we're going to do this by establishing something we're going to call the listening team. Listening is going to be a crucial skill and an action towards understanding where God is moving in our community and how we might be caught up in that movement of God's Spirit. And the listening is going to help us avoid some mistakes. You know, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. We don't want solutions in search of problems, right? We want to, sometimes congregations with every good intention act believing that they know what the needs around them are and kind of miss it. So we're going to do some listening and make sure we're hearing those needs. And we might not need to reinvent the wheel, right? And there's something already going on maybe that we can join, or we just need to be open to what that's going to look like. So, what does a listening team do? Members of the team will engage in one-on-one conversation with community leaders. And when they do, the member of the listening team is going to ask 2 questions only. Where are the broken places in our community that you see? And where do you see them being addressed or not? Then the team member really just does sit and listen. This might feel uncomfortable because we're used to coming in, right, with solutions or targets or goals or ideas or something like that. I've used this tool in 2 different communities now, and it's incredibly effective for helping us know our community rather than just think we do. And it's also been very much appreciated by those that I've spent in time listening. So who is a community leader? Oh, okay, who's going to be on the listening team? Us and people in our congregation who are comfortable listening without having some sort of preconceived idea of where the congregation should go. They're going to be people who are willing to initiate a one-on-one meeting with somebody. And they're going to be people who are open to hear whatever the conversation partner has to say without correcting or influencing or directing them. We really, really are just going to listen. So, who is a community leader? Well, anybody who interacts with our community on a daily basis. And let me give you some examples. Anybody who works in education, HR directors, lawyers, police, the mayor, anybody over at Northwest, park districts, service providers, bankers, you get the idea. Our goal really is to hear about our community as it's described by people who see it through a different lens or who may perhaps challenge our assumptions. Now, let me give you an example. In one community, I interviewed a banker. And this person described that the financial products that were used most frequently in this upper middle and upper class community were loans and credit, when you would think they should be things like investments. We matched that up with some other things we were hearing in the community and realized one of the spiritual issues in our community was that people felt like they had to pass as having a whole lot more material goods than they actually do, and they were going into debt to get it. Another example, a school counselor who talked about the intense pressure that some of the students at our high school felt to get a 4.0 or higher. So you begin to see how talking with some of these people really can unearth some of the things that you and I might not know about. So aren't these people going to think we're weird? What, you just want me to come and talk to you? These are real things that people have said to me after having a one-on-one conversation like this. No one's ever asked for my thoughts on this. Thank you. I appreciate that you want to hear from us. What an interesting thing for a church to be willing to do. To the person, nothing but appreciation and gratitude for being invited into this kind of a conversation. And there'll be some people that say, no, thank you. And that's okay too. But the shorter answer is no, they're not going to think you're weird. They're going to appreciate it, I promise. So are these questions really just so we can figure out, justice and equity stuff in our neighborhood? No. Actually, we really are listening for the things in our community that the community itself sees as its needs, and discovering God's movement in them. Those needs might be things that we think of as justice and equity. They might also be things like what I named with the needing to pass and the pressure to get a higher than a 4.0 grade average. We might hear things like, we need a place for peace and quiet. We need a place that can help us raise our kids. It really is just going in and listening. And certainly some of those will fall in the justice and equity category. And some of those things are going to fall in our other preliminary strategic areas as well. So this conversation between one of us and somebody from the community is not an offer for partnership or giving advice. It isn't committing St. Simon's to help this person in any way, not a promise of support. What it is a, are we there, Mike?
Yes, I'm
There
sorry.
we go. Thank you. What it is a tangible demonstration that we value that person's experience and their knowledge. It's an embodiment that what they do is worth our time. It matters. And it really, really, really is just listening and discovering what our community looks like through the eyes of this person that we're giving our undivided attention to. So what happens next with the listening team specifically? Well, there'll be an invitation for participants. And so I ask you to think about, is this the kind of thing that you might like to do, that you feel called to? We will get together, there will be training, we will practice, and we'll feel weird and awkward and get all that worked out just in a safe place with each other. Then we're going to brainstorm some potential conversation partners. And then we will go ahead and have those one-on-one conversations. Members of the team will have more than one, and we'll begin to kind of collect that input and those stories from people in our community. And the first thing we are going to do with all this information is to take that to prayer and meditation. We're going to spend time sitting with what we hear. We're going to notice any themes that emerge. And that word emerge is really important. It's not something that we direct. There will be themes that come to the surface and emerge. We're going to integrate whatever we're hearing from the community with the congregational discernment of our call. And of course, we're going to bring all this back to the congregation so that so that all of us are kept up to speed and all of us know what's happening and what we're learning. And I think this is where I hand it back to Mike. Thank you.
So with all that, and there's a lot between what you've heard today and what you may have been present for or you got from our summary from a couple of weeks ago, there's a lot, and there's a lot to digest and to be thinking about, but I think it ties in with that notion that there's something different. And keeping in mind that the values shape the why, our society determines the what, and ultimately our plan will express the how. I just wanted to give you maybe a nice visual of kind of how this might all fit together as you start thinking a little bit more about what we're up to and your role in it. So that why component are those core values, those things that have remained consistent, and they drive what St. Simon's is all about. And from those core values, what we've been doing in our initial movements here is discerning, given the current challenges, what opportunities are there. And we started to establish those preliminary strategic areas and goals. And those are some of the things that you heard from Carol. And those initial 3 areas, preliminary, are the worship and formation, proclaiming, and service and justice. And what you're starting to maybe piece together is we're on the path to determine the what. So with sort of these stages as a backdrop, the next steps fall into these areas. We will begin that listening process that Jenny just described. From there, we will again do more discerning and kind of figure out ultimately what makes sense for St. Simon's. As Lynn pointed out, in the end, we're still going to be us. But how can the next phase of St. Simon's better perhaps meet the needs and wants of the changing society? And then after determining what makes sense, working to get down into more specific actions and continue those plans. knowing that it's going to be murky, knowing it's going to take time, knowing that there's going to maybe be revisions along the way, but ultimately moving towards the how, and the how will be our strategic plan. So maybe this visual, this overview kind of gives a nice summary of what we've been up to and what you've been hearing from this presentation and the presentation a couple of weeks back. So with that, I think I will stop sharing the screen and back to Jen.
Excellent. All right, thank you. So thank you to the vestry members for your leadership. Thank you for everybody's attention. And so I'd like to